Hi, I'm the Moss Man, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a kind of more in-depth look at the Philodendron Birkin. Now, I apologize if I'm looking like this the whole time. That's because I have all my information written down, and I'm not so good at memorizing it. I'll be able to elaborate on everything that I have written down here. First, we're going to do a little bit of the background, and then... Now, this, by the way, I forgot to show you. This is my Philodendron Birkin. Not in all of its glory, unfortunately, because I started taking cuttings, but this is the Philodendron Birkin. I also have some of my cuttings of the Philodendron Birkin right here. Now these are, you can see the variegation much better, but we'll get into that. So, the Philodendron Birkin is a part of the family Araceae. This family contains many popular indoor plants, such as monsteras, ZZ plants, peace lilies, and obviously other philodendrons. And there's a whole bunch of other ones in there because it's a family, it's a large group. This family hosts many popular houseplants because they tend to be low maintenance and will still grow in low light situations. I have specifically said that they still grow in low light situations because they do not thrive in low light situations. As with any other plant, they need sunlight to provide them with their energy and their sugars. Obviously, there are small exceptions to that, but these plants are not those exceptions. They will survive in low light conditions. Oftentimes, they will still grow in low light conditions. They will do better with more light. Now, this is true to a point, but if you put them in direct sunlight forever, they're not going to do well. But bright indirect sunlight is still fine for these plants, and I'd say more optimal. And not like in the corner in a room with no windows that you never enter and you don't turn the lights on. The plants in the Araceae family are called aroids, and they appear in the understory, which is kind of like, I'll show a graphic, like kind of here in a rainforest. Around where I live, the understory consists of things like various bushes and ferns, and so that maybe will give you an idea of a comparable light level. The Philodendron Birkin is a mutation of the Philodendron Rojo Congo, and it's a mutation that's not found in the wild. The Rojo Congo itself is a cultivar, which means it is a cultivated variation. Editing Mossman just jumping in here. It's actually variety and not variation, which is a small distinction, but is important for general plant naming stuff. So yes, it's variety and not variation. So also designed by people, and it's designed to survive better as an indoor plant. If we look at some of the examples of the Rojo Congo, like here's some pictures of leaves and comparing them to the leaves of the Philodendron Birkin, you can see a lot of similarities. Even with my cuttings and the plant that I have here, the main plant, you can still see like red showing up on the stem, which is because it is a mutation of the Rojo Congo, which has red stems. The specific mutation is what causes those white lines on the leaves. Now that's called variegation, but very simply, variegation is when certain cells don't produce chlorophyll, and therefore are not green and cannot do photosynthesis, which is another thing to keep in mind. Especially with the Philodendron Birkin, if you're keeping it in a low light condition, it will likely lose a lot of those white lines, because those white lines are basically wasted space on the leaves where it can't do photosynthesis. So if it's not getting enough light or it's not getting an optimal amount of light, it is going to adapt and have less blank space, less wasted space. And if you give it more and more light, it's more likely to have larger white areas. And sometimes you'll see ones with leaves that are only white altogether. Of course, mine has lots that are only green, but... So now let's talk about propagation. So what I've done is I have cut off a bunch of chunks, and I have cut them off below the node. Now, what that means is a node is basically every chunk off the stem where there is other things growing, usually kind of at an angle out from the stem. Now, those areas are areas where there's lots of growth hormones being sent out, obviously, to the ends of those, usually branches or leaves or whatever's coming off there. So a good thing to have is to cut below a node, which pretty much always happens. Never cut on a node. These were nodal cuts. Originally, I was actually just kind of pruning the plant a little bit, but I noticed they had some good aerial roots, so I decided to cut them a little more precisely. Now, what an aerial root is, are these, well, they look like roots growing off of the plant up in the air instead of like down under the soil where you can't see them. And actually, I have this picture of this monstera that I saw, and as you'll remember, a monstera is also an aroid. They're in the same family. So a picture of this monstera that has some crazy looking aerial roots coming off of it. You want to make sure with like your philodendron, with your philodendrons and whatnot, that your cuttings have a section with aerial roots above them. So then those aerial roots can grow out and become regular roots for the plant. Some people keep, what they do is they'll like cut the stem halfway and then they'll pack some sort of moisture retention, so like sphagnum moss and like a plastic wrap or something around those aerial roots, usually like newer aerial roots, to let those aerial roots grow out, and then they'll cut the rest of the way through the plant, take it off and plant it somewhere. I haven't done that because, like I said, I was kind of actually pruning my philodendron back a little bit. So this also works. Cut below some roots, stick it in some water, and wait until those aerial roots start growing more, and I'll show you. This is where they were when I cut them off, and this is how far they've grown in, give or take, a week. It hasn't been that long. Now, philodendrons like soil with lots of nutrients and a decent amount of moisture retention, but still good drainage. They also do well in slightly acidic soil, so a pH of like 6, which is not very acidic, but it's more acidic than neutral. And fortunately, peat moss is great for those things. Now, peat moss is good for moisture retention, and it over time will kind of decompose some of those nutrients into the soil, but it is good to have other soil amendments, like some bark or some castings, some worm castings in your soil, to add more nutrients. Of course, since I'm doing it from cutting, I don't actually want or need that much junk in the soil to keep it growing. But as it gets bigger, adding some more nutrients either into the soil or fertilizing it, good idea. And as far as having a slightly acidic soil, peat moss is acidic and makes soil acidic, so often other soil supplements are added to balance that out. And for those reasons, philodendrons can often be planted just straight in peat and only peat. The good thing about that is most standard potting mixes or whatever will be peat moss and perlite. And now there'll be different mixes and different compositions, but it's mostly peat moss, and so don't be picky. Pretty much any basic potting mix is fine. I will show you what I do, just because I have some soil amendments with me but you don't have to be picky. Preferably don't use like a cactus or succulent mix, but again, just a general potting mix is perfectly fine. If you have a bag that says like philodendron mix or like tropical mix, that was probably a decent choice as well. So yeah, now I'll just show you me mixing up some soil and sticking this sucker in, because only one of them, I believe, has roots long enough that I want to plant it. Stick this sucker in the soil and we'll be on our merry way. thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Hopefully the video was informative and palatable. And I'd like to thank the musicians who provided music for this video. Their names will be in the description. And yeah, I will see you in the next one.